devotees rise. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week, we asked the question, why do devotees fall? And we considered the downfall of Judas in this context. Jesus, in answer to Judas' criticism for allowing Mary to rub his feet with spikenard, a very costly ointment, said, "The poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always." Jesus is saying here that there is one supreme injustice that needs eradication. Poverty, yes, but not of a material kind. Poverty in a spiritual sense. Divine blessings are not common in this world. They are extraordinary. When they come, we should give them priority above every other consideration. Never allow a moment of inner joy, for instance, to be set aside for lesser duties. Divine attunement is our highest priority. As Lahiri Mahashaya, the guru of Yogananda's guru, said, to listen to the heart's inner sound, Om, which issues from the very center of our being, is man's highest duty. Mary was not at that moment communion with the Master inwardly. She was serving him outwardly, but in a spirit very different from the restless fussing for which Jesus had reprimanded her sister Martha. Those who see a radical difference between the paths of action and meditation should understand this distinction. To serve in the right spirit is necessary, for only thereby can we overcome our karmic tendencies toward restless activity. The important thing is that spirit be always inwardly focused, that in everything we do, we act in loving service to the Lord. Therefore, the Bhagavad Gita says in the 3rd chapter, the state of freedom from action, that is, of eternal rest in the spirit, cannot be achieved without action. No one, by mere renunciation and outward non-involvement, can attain perfection. Whenever the Spirit of God descends upon you, however, remember the words of Jesus, "Me ye have not always with you." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Happy Sunday again, dear friends. How devotees rise? How do we rise ourselves? It's a question also of density in the end, density of consciousness. Somehow I could create, let's say, three main phases. The first phase could be walking with the body. The second is like a balloon. And the third phase is the rocket. And I will explain it better now. In the end, there's a certain level of density, inward density. We struggle in material life, the matter, surviving, the money, desire for money, the fear of not having money or the fear of having money. All this movement around surviving creates a vibration of density, of material density, and then a little less dense, more liquid enters creative energy, sexuality that finds attraction and repulsion on a horizontal plane. And we try to express this creativity maybe also in other artistic ways. Anyhow, somehow we need to elevate this energy by bringing it in and up. And then somehow a next dimension, even it's still on the level of horizontal walking. We need to play with fire and power, with career, with your position in society, in life, expansion in life. It's a little less dense. We can see it's a different level of density. There's more fire, and this fire, then we need this fire. Do you know how the balloon, in order to make it rise, we need the fire to fill this great balloon. And the more there's fire, the more we can rise, the more we enter into a more subtle dimension of heart, of air, the element of air, where if we don't open this great balloon, then we cannot enter into this more subtle element. So we need to free the dimension of our heart of all the emotions that we have in our heart. Swami Sri Yukteswar defines this dimension of the heart a little bit as crucial in the spiritual path. He defined the 8 meannesses of the heart, main meannesses, that obstacle the rising, our rising of consciousness, our elevation, inner elevation. And I will name some meannesses now. As you know, one is the hate, when you want to push people away, other people shouldn't be there, these situations should not be there. So it's the repulsion of things. You don't want situations to happen. Or superbness, criticism, and other meannesses of the heart that we all know very well in the dimension of our heart. This constant pulsation of desiring or pushing away, which creates attention. There's still a lot of density, and the balloon cannot rise fully. We cannot lift yet up from this earth if we do not purify this dimension of our heart. And here Sri Yukteswar in his little booklet says, we are still practicing yama and niyama. Practice yama and niyama, because that purifies the 8 meannesses of the heart. Yama and niyama are the things to do and not to do, to behave appropriately, to not desire things that belong to others, to not lie, to adore the divine. So many aspects of who practices yoga knows these aspects. All these things purify the heart. Service, giving, forgetting about oneself in the very action. And so slowly, slowly, our balloon gets bigger and lighter, and we are then ready to cut the weights that tie us to this world. And this passage that we need to pass through often has to do with forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, and balancing all the things in life to lighten our heart, because otherwise we cannot lift up, we cannot rise. There's also this image from Egypt. It's a booklet about the death in Egypt. When you die, your heart will be put on a balance, on a weight, and it's defined how much your heart weighs when you die. So how many attachments you still have, how many relationships you didn't solve, maybe you hated, you have a lot of fear. So all these things make our heart become very heavy, and so that's the things that also tie our balloon to this earth. And we need to look at the deep depth of our heart and trying to cut all the strings that tie us. We need to heal our heart, purify this dimension of the heart, and then we can rise. And at a certain moment happens what Sri Yukteswar calls the state of the natural love of the heart. I like this word, the natural love of the heart, because the natural state is a love that is not conditioned by the other, by what happens or not happens. It is unconditional, and it's our normal state of being. Our normal state of being is love. And when all these veils, all these covers have gone, when we cut these strings of our heart, then we don't need to do anything else, because this natural love just expresses. It's like a lotus flower that just naturally opens, spontaneously opens, when we can let go of all the other things. And that's the moment when our balloon lifts finally up from the earth. And Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's master, for who doesn't know him, Sri Yukteswar identifies this with the state of baptism. He says that the true baptism, of which also Saint John spoke, or that Jesus practiced, this true baptism is the baptism in the sound of Om. When spontaneously this inner sound awakens in us, which is also called Ganga, Jordan, Om, many names, many cultures talk about it. It has many names, and this is the baptism of sound, of light, of the spirit. It happens when our heart is purified, when all these strings, or almost all strings, can be cut. And then we enter into the next phase of the rocket, when we raise inside another step in our spiritual initiation, when our inner energy currents are balanced in Ida and Pingala, they find union in the spiritual eye. And in that moment, in the moment of this inner baptism, this initiation in Om, which is also called Kundalini, when this energy of our life force, enters into this mystical, mysterious inner channel, which is called Shushumna. And many talk about it, but it's difficult to experience this inner initiation into the presence of Ganga, of Jordan, of Om, the spirit. When everything becomes light, we unite our inner energy, and it raises as a rocket high above into spiritual dimensions. As Saint Teresa of Avila called this image, it's like when we are shot into another dimension of the soul. And that's the third phase, where we need to let go of all identifications with our little self, believing that we are a body, a personality, our memories of the past, but even of other lifetimes. step by step we need to let go, offer up, in and up all these identification. So the main work is offering up, offering in and up on every level where we are, on the level of walking horizontal, all the energy, let's try to bring it in and offering it up, letting go of density of consciousness, and then step by step also in the dimension of the heart there is the feeling of being so big and expansive. We expand in our heart, and the perception of our being becomes so big. And then this sound is born, and it's interesting because in the word of the chakra of the heart, Anahata, do you know the meaning? Anahata, and I don't know how, but it's the unstruck sound. That's the meaning, a sound that is born by itself. It's not put into vibration by anything. It's an unstruck sound. It doesn't need a resonating body because the whole universe becomes the resonating body. A sound born by itself. It's like the natural love of the heart that is born by itself when we can cut the strings that tie us to density, to our identifications, to our limited ideas of ourselves. So this is how we can get out. And I want to read to you from last week when Anand talked in the Sunday service last week. He talked about how devotees fall, so it's important how they rise too, and it's in the book, The Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and this is a beautiful verse because it says everything. Dwelling mentally on sense objects breeds attachment to them, and then it's like a spiral from downwards up. From attachment arises craving. From craving, when frustrated, springs anger. Anger produces delusion. Delusion causes forgetfulness of the self. Loss of memory as to what one is in truth causes decay of the power of discrimination. From loss of discrimination ensues the annihilation of all right understanding. Echo, you see where we are. So we did this spiral downwards, not upwards, a downward spiral. And so how did we arrive here? How did this happen? So now we need to do the inverted way to rise up again. And here Swami Kriyananda says in the comment, every step in this descent has a single linchpin, the ego. To rise again toward wisdom, the deluded ego must reach the point where it realizes that what it has understood of life so far has brought it nothing but pain. Its first question then must be, do I like suffering? No, obviously. Next it should ask, what increases suffering and what, on the other hand, lessens it? The answer is that suffering diminishes when there is a decrease of self-interest. The discernment of this truth leads to the first faint stirring of recollection that a reality exists that is more than the ego and the body. The fog of delusion begins to lift from the mind, and one no longer strikes out at the world in anger for not giving him what he wants. So as long as we always say it's the fault of the world, it's the fault of the other, we are still in the downward facing spiral. From acceptance of what is comes a gradual decrease of worldly attachment. So we need to accept everything that happens as coming from the divine for our good. From lessened attachment comes lessening interest in the objects of the senses and an increase of longing for true wisdom, a longing which awakens devotion in the heart, the natural love of the heart, love of truth and intense aspiration to know true and everlasting bliss. So here we arrive to this point where our heart desires again this dimension of the divine. And so, my friends, when this happens, when it happens that we feel inspired, a moment of inner connection, that is the most important thing in life. All the rest is secondary. And so many times it happens regularly, to say the truth, that maybe I have had a nice meditation and I sit there and then I think, oh, I need to do this or that, and I go out and I try to finish, and then I try to reconnect myself, but then the loop starts, the spiral of life, and I do this and that, and slowly I forget what I experienced in that meditation, that state of being. And then I say, oh no, how did this happen? Because I always get caught in life, in these vortexes of life. And some time ago, a person told me he or she had come back from a trip to Himalaya, that in this pilgrimage, during the day, when you forget this undefinable state of being, this divine connection, this inner union, it's something inward. When the heart opens up and you feel this love, it's like an inner liquid, and it's so beautiful. And this person said, it's almost a pain if for maybe 10 minutes I lose this and I think, oh my God, I forgot this inner feeling. And immediately she said, I need to come back to this state. And when you are at this point, you are at a good point. When you feel that you disconnect and you feel almost a pain because your beloved is no longer within you. That's why in India and also in other religious cultures, this beloved divine, when you forget your beloved, you feel a terrible pain, of course, when you feel this disconnection of love, and you want to immediately come back to this connection. That is the phase of the lifting balloon, when the natural love of the heart opens, and you mainly feel this in life, this desire of the soul to unite with the divine. I remember for years I have not been, but in September I will go again to Himalaya, to Badrinath. And I remember that every year for many years, arriving to Badrinath, arriving in a valley high above the mountains in the Himalaya, 3,300 meters, whatever, I would sit down in this valley and I would feel the world, the life, just falling away. And I could see my life, my soul evolution up to this point. And symbolically, it was from the high top in Himalaya, but it was also an inward looking at my life from above, and I could see all the errors I've made, all the good things, all the bad things that I have made up to this point of my life. And every year I could do this inward revision, and I have not been doing it for years, but now I will go back and redo it in September. And in this moment, in the moment when we all will need to leave this dimension, this body, what will be the most important moments looking back will not be the moments of success, the moments of this relationship or that, but it will be the moments when we have felt this connection with the divine. Those are the points of light on our timeline of life. There are all these points of light that raise up on our timeline of life when we have felt the connection with the divine. We need to somehow awaken this flame that will blow up our inner balloon. And how do we do this? Yesterday I've read a little bit in a booklet about Saint Francis, and there was this story when he met his first brothers, Bernardo of Quintavalle, Pietro, Peter. They both were very rich men of great career, and somehow he preached, St. Francis preached, and people thought he was crazy and people laughed about him. He talked about sister poverty. St. Francis himself was the son of one of the richest merchants of Assisi, and he stood there in the piazza of Assisi with his dirty clothes or little clothes, and preached. And these boys, these men, they followed him because they felt something, and it was not the concept, the theology that he proposed, an interpretation of the Bible, the authenticity. They simply felt something from him, this spiritual power that he must have had. When Saint Bernard saw him in bliss, in ecstasies during the night, something struck him. And in those times, it wasn't like today when you leave your house and the richness of the society somehow can lift you up, can maintain you. In those days, if you went out of society, you had nothing, no social network or anything, but they had something else, something that they felt, this very strong and intense desire to feel God. And we too, we need to somehow lit this inner flame that we want only this in everything we do. We don't necessarily need to abandon everything as Saint Francis and his brothers did. No, it is not necessary, but inwardly we need to let go and understand that everything else is secondary. There's a story in India. For many years I have met a yogi who was in the line of Kriya Yoga. His name was Swami Gyanananda, and he had a particular, he was from Switzerland originally, and he left in 1952. He read the autobiography of a yogi. It was the day of Yogananda's Mahasamadhi when he received this book. He read it, closed the book, said, "This is for me, I'm going to India." In those times, it wasn't like today. He went there by autostop and walking. He went all the way to India, straight to Dakshineshwar, where an ashram of Yogananda was. So he knew where to go. And there was another brother of Yogananda, Swami Atmananda, a brahmachari, a great master, spiritual master, also him. And so they met, and he received initiation into Kriya, into this state of baptism, a true experience. So he threw his passport away and never went back to the West. And he lived in India from there onwards as a sadhu in Himalaya, a person filled with joy and love. He was a beautiful person, but I didn't want to tell this story. I wanted to tell a different story. He wrote a book which is not translated into Italian, it's written in German. And in this book, he tells many experiences with yogis who were crazy of love for God. And one of these yogis, there's this story, they were together, three aspiring spiritual yogis, and one of them recited from the scriptures when, for example, when the spiritual awakening happens, it is the same sensation, the same feeling as a tiger in a cage. When you open the cage and the tiger finally can get out of the cage and goes back to the jungle. So that's this feeling of complete freedom. And one of these aspiring spiritual seekers with these words felt this state of ecstasy, and from his body, vibhuti, powder, ashes, fell off his body. It's a sacred ash. And so he left everything. He didn't say a word. And he went into the Himalaya, never came back. Someone saw him somewhere. He had become a great yogi in the Himalaya. So this intensity of devotion brings us to freedom. It's not for all, of course. I remember a meeting many years ago. Swami Chidananda, whom I consider a saint, came to Assisi. He is the successor of Swami Shivananda in Rishikesh, India. And we sat, and there was a photo, an image of Ananda Moima. Maybe you have heard of this beautiful woman saint whom also Yogananda talks about in the autobiography. So this Swami Chidananda had a very strong link with Ananda Moima. And when one of the present people talked about Ananda Moima, we could see that he went into ecstasy, into bliss, and started chanting Ma, Ma, Ma. And he was gone. He was in a state of ecstasy in those moments, and we experienced that. And I also remember our Swami Kriyananda, especially in the last days of his years of his life, when he talked about Yogananda, somehow he lost his voice. He then told us that he felt the presence of the Master so strongly that he couldn't continue talking. It was this desire, this inner desire of the soul to unite with this divine love, that somehow we need to reach this level of intensity too. And all the ceremonies, we talk, and sometimes I think now with social media we go on Instagram, on WhatsApp, and all talk and write, and everyone knows everything, everyone teaches. We need to listen. We need to listen more inside to the sound of Om that vibrates within us. And that's the exit way. As Lahiri Mahashaya said, it is important, the only important thing is to reconnect with Om inside of us. The last story for today is when 40 years ago, Mamma Mia, so long ago, I was a young boy, 17 years old, and I arrived in Assisi, and I've met a meditation teacher It was at the Hermitage of St. Francis, and somehow I met him there, and he taught me a simple meditation, and we sat there in this hermitage, and it was more or less my first true meditation. And I tried to meditate, and I cannot say that something special happened, but something did happen, because I felt a desire within me. I want to discover more. I felt that there is something to discover within me. Very strong feeling. And from that moment, also outwardly in life, I didn't eat any piece of meat anymore. I didn't smoke anymore. I didn't drink anymore. I just let go naturally everything. And I just changed my lifestyle very radically. But I didn't reason it. I didn't decide to do it. I didn't think about it before. I didn't want those things anymore. And no one around me had done a similar choice. But from that moment, and this is one of the statistics of my life, let's say this is one of the peak moments of life, where something important happened. And looking back, it was maybe one of the most important moments of my life, when something happened within me and I aligned to a memory of my soul. And we need to follow these callings. When you feel it, follow it, this inner calling. Nothing else is important. The rest of the world will always be there. But this grace that comes upon us, when it happens, try to receive it.